So, okay, hello everyone from everywhere. I hope you had a good lunch or having a good lunch. I'm Yani. I'm going first. I'm the Deputy Facility Director for the Singapore's National Marine Lab at St. John's Island. And I'm here to give you just a short introduction to the National Marine Lab. I would like to very much thank the Global Young Scientist Summit for inviting us and being able to share with you more about our very own marine station in Singapore. So next. So just a little bit of history. The marine station on St. John's Island is actually slightly over 20 years old and only became the National Marine Lab in 2016 when it became a national research infrastructure to support marine science research and education in Singapore. But the St. John's Island National Marine Lab, as we call it, remains as Singapore's one and only offshore marine research station, and we're based, surprise, surprise, on St. John's Island. So where is St. John's Island, you ask? Well, this is Singapore, and some of you may or may not be familiar with Singapore, and this is the main island of Singapore, right? And just south of that, we have St. John's Island and a lot of other islands, and on one of these islands, that's where our marine station is located. Next. Okay, so Singapore is very much next. So Singapore is very much known for its unique high-rise skyline, like this one. You know, the top left-hand corner here, where you see iconic Marina Bay Sands, the Singapore Flyer, tall skyscrapers. But I think not as many people know that beyond the coast of the main island of Singapore, that Singapore still has much to offer. We have lots of small islands still, as I mentioned, and Singapore actually has almost as much sea space as we do land. So marine science is actually very important here for us in Singapore. And on the right here, what you see is a drone shot of Lazarus Island, one of the many islands we have in Singapore, by a young, talented nature filmographer in Singapore, Nathaniel Soon. And St. John's Island is where we're based. It's just out of the frame a little bit to the left. Next. Okay, so this is the marine station, and it is surrounded by rich ecosystems like coastal forests, natural rocky shores, mangrove patches, seagrass meadows, coral reefs, and all accessible from the marine station, just a walk down from the marine station. Next, for instance, just down the road from here is a bay that is called Bendera Bay, and it's also managed by community managed by the Friends of the Marine Park community, and we have seagrass and coral reef nurseries there, which is being used for a variety of research as well as for training students for hands-on field skills as well. Next. And just in the next island across is the Sisters Island, where the Sisters Island Marine Park is located. Also Singapore's first and only marine park, established based on science-based evidence that it acts as a source reef for nearby ecosystems. So it's a good job, next, that the marine station has a research vessel, Galaxia, and it is also fully equipped, next, with research lab, next, and people, places, including the Marine Park Outreach and Education Center based at the National Marine Lab as well. And of course, the pride and heart of the marine station, our aquarium facilities. And we have quite a number of aquarium facilities for all sorts of different purposes. I won't spoil it for you because right after this, we're going to just show you a short video that we've prepared for you to just showcase what else we have at the Marine Station at large, as a whole. Okay, next. So anyhow, as a national research infrastructure, the National Marine Lab, we're not just a facility or a lab. We do have a core team that includes skilled lab managers and core resident scientists, a couple of which you will hear from later. And together, the National Marine Lab not only serves to provide a shared research resource, supported by these skilled personnel, but also to serve as a focal point for marine science research and education here in Singapore, right? We're supporting research that meets strategic needs, including things like research that will help us address key issues with climate change, and marine climate change science is a key feature that research that we're supporting here. And importantly, the Marine Station is a shared facility open to all researchers, government agencies, industry, companies, startups, educators, teachers, and students. Especially, we do have a mandate to also a mission to also capacity build and educate, the next generation, you all, the young scientists of tomorrow. So anyhow, if you're ever in Singapore, maybe you can drop by St. John's Island now that you know there's something beyond the shores of the main island of Singapore, and do come and visit us. Or better yet, come down and plan to do some research with us at the St. John's Island National Marine Lab. With that, thank you very much. And please enjoy the next, short little video showcasing what we have at the Marine Station.
The St. John's Island National Marine Laboratory is Singapore's first and only offshore marine research facility. First opened in 2002, the Marine Station was designated as a national research infrastructure under Singapore's National Research Foundation in 2016. The mission of the lab is to serve as a focal point for marine science expertise, supporting research that meets Singapore's long-term strategic needs. The facility and resources are available to all marine science researchers. Strategically located next to Sisters Island Marine Park, high-quality seawater is pumped through the aquaria and well-equipped laboratories, providing unique opportunities for high-impact research in marine science. The cornerstone of the marine laboratory is an aquarium system that provides high-quality seawater drawn directly from the Singapore Straits. The facility boasts aquaria of many different configurations, enabling research in marine biodiversity, climate change, and environment to be readily undertaken. The laboratories are fully equipped to support research from the quantification of abiotic parameters in water quality to qualifying biotic relationships to monitoring ecosystem assemblages. Advancing tropical marine science research is key to securing Singapore's competitiveness in the global maritime industry and strengthen our country's blue economy in the long term. With proximity to natural marine habitats, in-situ field experiment and sampling can be conducted on board our very own research vessel. The research vessel Galaxia is supported by the Field Operation Office that assists researchers with trip planning, research support, and loaning of field equipment. Research at St. John's Island National Marine Laboratory aims to advance sustainable solutions to environmental challenges of tomorrow, made possible through our shared commitment to transdisciplinary research and collaboration, an island community of scholars.
Mainland is muted.
Right. Thanks, Yani. Yeah. So thank you very much, Yani, for sharing about our marine station. So I'm next. My name is Mei Lin. I'm a senior research fellow at the Tropical Marine Science Institute with the National University of Singapore. I'm also a resident scientist at the St. John's Island National Marine Lab. So today I'll share a little bit about my career and how I got into marine science and continue on this path of becoming a marine conservationist in this field as well. So a little bit about myself, more details about myself. I personally am born and raised in Singapore, and I completed my education in the different local institutions in Singapore. So that includes doing my PhD on marine ecology in Singapore. Over the past 15 years, I have been studying the marine life living in Singapore waters. And some of the questions that I study include how the marine animals are doing in the sea, how human activities such as fishing and shipping affect marine life, and how certain marine animal species may be related to one another. So as I learn more about what threatens marine life in Singapore and around the region as well, I started to use what I learned from my research to advocate for their conservation and management so that we can better protect them in the long term. So one such animal that I have been studying over the last decade or so is the giant clam, right, that you can see here, which is also my favorite marine animal. So there are many reasons that inspired me to eventually pursue a career in marine science and conservation. So it started out as a genuine curiosity about Mother Nature and how things work in the environment. So with time, it became a passion where I dove deeper into the science of the environment, specifically when I was studying about the giant clams. And through this period of working as a marine scientist, I also discovered the purpose of my work, including using my own voice to communicate science and champion for marine conservation. And finally, also having a lot of perseverance to keep myself going and being patient for the results and celebrating the small wins at each step along the way. And earlier on, when some of you have heard from one of the keynote speakers, he talked about being patient and about getting the results, but eventually persisting and persevering in the work itself, you actually get to see the outcomes of your research as well. But I also realized that this is not necessarily a stepwise process, but it's actually an entire journey of embracing all of these traits and motivating myself to chase a career in marine science. So my curiosity, passion, purpose, and perseverance have led me to this path of becoming a marine scientist. And on top of all this trait, as a scientist myself, I strongly believe that scientific research is very important in making discoveries and advancements that will allow progress in the environment and society. And the new information and results that we obtain from the research can be used to empower communities to rethink their relationships with the oceans and the greater environment as well. So from this point, I'm going to share very quickly some of the research projects that I've been involved in over the last few years. So again, going back to giant clams, the conservation of giant clams has been my long-standing passion project that has now become a reality in a sense. So I recently received a fellowship that will allow me to expand my efforts in their conservation to the Southeast Asia region beyond the scope of what I've always been looking at. So very quickly, giant clams, as its name suggests, they are the world's largest living marine shellfish. So the largest species can grow up to 1.5 meters long and weigh over 250 kgs. These are very important species. They can support and provide ecological services in coral reef ecosystems. From a cultural perspective, they are socially important to native coastal communities living around our region. However, they are globally threatened by various different challenges such as overfishing, pollution, and global climate change. So therefore, the work that I'm trying to do right here is to rethink how their conservation requires a more holistic approach of firstly also engaging local coastal communities to work together in protecting this iconic and yet threatened species. I'm also currently leading a project on mariculture research for 3 different model organisms. I work very closely with Dr. Yani on this as well. She looks after the hard corals section, and I look after the coral reefs and giant clams, which are so what you're seeing here at the lower part of the pictures are actually the babies of the different animals that we work with. So for those of you who are wondering what exactly is mariculture, it is the study of cultivating marine organisms for different purposes, including food, research, conservation, and even the aquarium trade. And the research topic itself allows us to study the babies of the marine organisms, which we know that are very important stepping stones in ensuring the species survival. Usually for mariculture research, we would focus on species with high commercial or conservation interests. Hence, these three groups of organisms that I highlighted earlier as well. And although it seems that we're all very smiling in this photo above there that says we're making waves for the future of marine life, it is in fact very, very hard work because your marine animals don't always cooperate. On a similar thread on looking at different conservation issues, I started to also delve into issues surrounding marine plastic pollution in Singapore and around the region as well. And I'm currently leading a project looking at the extent of marine pollution around Singapore, but also working with different Southeast Asian partners to actually collaborate on comparing our results, in different parts of our region and our regional waters. So we all know from very recent conversations and global international conversations as well is that marine plastic pollution is a global problem that's caused by human populations. We also know that there are many studies that have shown that the plastics and the different debris can affect marine life. The large plastics can cause strangulation of the larger animals, while the smaller plastics can actually cause obstruction and choking in the smaller animals as well. And there are also a growing number of studies showing that the marine plastics can actually eventually pose a risk to human health. But at the same time, there could also be a solution for plastic degradation. And that's also the part of what we're studying in this particular project. So in this particular project, we'll focus on something called plastisphere, which basically refers to plastic debris with microorganisms. Broadly, there are two parts to it. We know that there are certain microorganisms that could pose potential threats and hazards to the larger organisms, including us humans. But there are also microorganisms living on them that could also become potential, potential solutions, such as they are one of the functions that they have is degrading the plastic materials that they live on. So therefore, discovering certain enzymes within the biofilms of this plastisphere. So all this research is very interesting and exciting, but this information can help to fit into the greater part of society. But how do we do so? We know that it can only be effective when it's translated into usable bite-sized information for the general public. And therefore, communicating science is equally important in driving positive actions for marine conservation. So there are many other good reasons why we scientists should talk about science. So firstly, it's a way of paying back to society. And at least in Singapore's case, much of our research funding comes from the government and public sectors as well. And it can actually see it as a form of social responsibility in informing society of the work that we do. And secondly, we know that the knowledge of science can help to shape and influence mindsets. With this, scientists can help to also build support for their own science and promote the understanding to the of its wider relevance to society. And finally, I think it also helps scientists to seek out other potential collaborators by using it as a platform to showcase your research work beyond your own peers to a broader non-scientist audience. And as for me, there are many ways that I have done by communicating science to help raise awareness. So I feel very strongly about raising awareness through communicating science because I can use my voice to speak on behalf of the many marine life. And even though marine life cannot speak directly to us, they communicate to us through the results that we get by studying and observing them and obtaining the results from experiments. So, and then we will use this information to talk about it, to talk on their behalf. And for me, I've used various mediums to talk about the marine conservation, such as writing articles and commentaries, giving talks, participating in interviews as an expert. And also all these are very important avenues in reaching out to the masses. And finally, I'd like to leave you with some words of wisdom from our very esteemed professor of marine biology, Dr. Chow Lok Meng, who actually once said that coral reefs here in Singapore have not given up hope. So we should not give up on them. And I hope that this, motivation, this gives you inspiration to also continue in your own research in whatever topics that you're doing. With that, I'd like to pass the time over to another of our colleagues who will share about his work with us and his own work in Singapore. Over to you, Steve.
Oh, thank you very much. So my name is Stephen Summers. I am a Senior Research Fellow at CELSI NTU in Singapore, as well as one of the resident scientists at the St. John's National Marine Laboratory. So today I'm just going to give you an example of two of the types of projects that I currently undertake.
Steve,
on the island.
Are you there?
Yes.
With
Yes, I'm here. Okay, sorry. Yes, so I want to just give you a flavour of sort of some of the projects that I undertake. So next. Thank you. So here we have one project that we currently have ongoing. We have a project which is looking at how natural environments, such as rocky shore environments, have a flourishing ecosystem, whereas a similar substratum, such as a seawall protection, has a very sort of barren environment. And the reason this is important is because as the climate changes, we see sort of increase in seawall protections around the world. And this is having a negative effect because these natural seawalls do not perform anywhere near as good as a natural rocky environment, even though they are of equal or similar materials, i.e. basaltic or potentially granite rock. So the ecosystem services provided by the rocky shore environment are far exceed what we see from a seawall. So how can we use biofilms and microbial and invertebrate settlement to actually combat this? So next. So biofilms and invertebrates in general have a relationship. Whenever any surface enters the marine environment, the first thing that happens is we get a bacterial, a prokaryote biofilm will form on the surface. This in itself is mostly invisible to the naked eye, but they give off various chemical cues. And it's these chemical cues which are detected by a lot of the larvae. In this particular image, you can see a barnacle larvae, but this can be true for various tube worms, corals, any type of invertebrate or a sort of small organism that may settle could potentially be picking up on these chemical cues. And what we've discovered as part of this project is that various polysaccharides are actually given off by the bacterial biofilm. And these particular polysaccharides can either encourage settlement or discourage settlement. So by altering the microbial level, we can actually play a role in altering the macroecology level of settlement in these particular areas. So what is key here is that we can, in essence, design our ecology that we can grow on various surfaces. But if we flip that, we can also discourage settlement. So if we take various environments like vessels or harbours where we don't want the barnacles or the corals to settle, it would be really nice to understand this communication, this polysaccharide communication that's happening between the larvae and the bacteria, and we could potentially dissuade them. Right, next. So next, I want to talk about a different type of project, and this is very similar to what Dr. Neil was telling you about earlier, but I'm specifically looking at the plastosphere associated with biodegradable polymers, so biodegradable plastics. And this is a commercial-led project, and one of the things we are looking at is a typical biodegradable plastic that you would find in the supermarket or advertised on the store. They don't tend to degrade very well in a natural environment, only in industrial environments. We want to see how some of these supposedly biodegradable polymers actually react in a natural environment. So therefore, using the stunning facility aquaria facilities at St. John's, we can actually subject a lot of these biodegradable polymers to natural seawaters under natural UV conditions. And then what we do is we monitor the biofilms, the bacterial biofilms that grow on them over time, and start to look at which bacteria, which enzymes are related in the actual biodegradation of all of these different polymer types that we see in the chart on the right. From this, we are starting to get an understanding of which of these supposedly biodegradable polymers actually biodegrade and which of them don't. But more importantly, we're starting to get a really nice understanding of the mechanisms by which they biodegrade, meaning that in the future, we can design our polymers so that they degrade, rather than design ones that would degrade in industry and hope that they degrade in the natural environment. Next. So why is biodegradable polymers important? So here is a best case scenario for the use of plastics in our society. There'll always be a requirement for new polymers to be produced, but hopefully we can get sort of 90–95% of these recycled. But even when that occurs, we still see some leakage, some spillage, some littering, and these, because of the longevity of polymers, will have a cumulative effect, and they will eventually build up so that we have a similar problem as we see today. So by introducing polymers which we can ensure has biodegradation, any of this leakage and spillage that we see into the natural environment in this best case scenario will not lead to an environmental impact such as what we see today. And with that, thank you all. Thank you very much for listening. I move on.
So thank you, everyone. So this is a very quick show of about us, and I'm gonna stop sharing right now, so makes it easier for us to see everybody. Yes. Okay. So I will have a look. So we have some time for Q&A right now, and I'm going to go into the Slido to see if there's any questions for any of us. So if you do have questions for us relating to our research, relating to the Marine Lab, or relating to our careers, you can actually post a question in the Slido. Maybe as we are waiting, we can actually have like a little bit more sharing also. I think maybe, you've heard from myself and you've heard from Steve about our research. Maybe Dr. Yani can share a little bit about her own research that she's doing right now. Yeah.
Well, yeah, as Maylin said, I work mainly on coral. Thanks, Maylin. I'm also actually a senior research fellow with the Tropical Marine Science Institute at the National University of Singapore. So I do conduct research other than helping to manage the National Marine Lab. and I mainly work on corals, both looking at using corals to reconstruct past environmental conditions, the past environment and the environment in which we share with them, as well as looking at how corals respond to environmental changes, with the ultimate aim of, figuring out as much as possible to try and make sure they're still around for a good long time, for the next generation to enjoy and benefit from the ecosystem functions that they provide. So that's really just the summary of the kinds of research that I do. But right now, I think with Mei Lin, like what Mei Lin was sharing, the both of us, we do have a Mariculture project together, and as she said, the coral team looks after the corals, and we're currently culturing over 2,000 coral fragments at the St. John's Island National Marine Lab. A lot of these are going to be used for research, so that we won't need to take fragments or corals from the field. We're going to be looking at specifically how to better tag corals through the aquarium trade to see if we can find a better way to support sustainable aquarium trade methods, and also for restoration purposes. So there's also another project that a new project that's just started this year, where we're actually gonna after the successful upscaling of the coral mariculture at the St. John's Island National Marine Lab, together with Mei Lin, we're gonna look at expanding further and then transplanting the corals into some degraded areas around Singapore.
Yep.
Yeah.
So that's very exciting for us as well. Yeah, no, I think like it's basically showing a bit of showcase of like the types of restoration work that we do. So we have a question here for Steve, which is basically, what are the materials in the market so far that is the closest to being biodegradable? So he was asking, is it PP, PLA?
Okay. So there are a few truly biodegradable polymers. So PLA, which is polylactic acid, yes, that is well known to degrade. Anything which is, let's say, plant-based, so cellulose-based polymers, they will degrade. And there's a few bacterial produced polymers, such as PHA, PHB. These are known to degrade as well. The trick here is, even though a company will report something as PLA, they tend to mix that PLA with other different additives and other types of polymer, and this can have an effect. So those are the popular ones which can degrade, but it depends on the manufacturer and how they've spliced them together, and this can confound the result.
I see. Yeah, that's very interesting. From like, I mean, from my brief understanding, that plastics are not essentially just a single type of polymer, but many of the materials that we have is actually a conglomerate of.
We like to simplify them, but there are thousands upon thousands of variants and combinations. So
yeah, that's right. So we have two questions that I think we can both answer between Yani and myself. So one of it, maybe we can start with the broad one, which is, what is the current state of marine environment in Singapore in terms of the marine animal population and pollution? And I think related to pollution is also coral bleaching, given that it's a big problem. So maybe you want to give it a start first, Yani?
Sure, yeah. In terms of biodiversity, I can speak for the corals that we still actually have, on record, like over 250 species of hard corals here in Singapore, which is about a third of the global total, about 800 out there. So we still have, rich biodiversity, but we do have very little coral reefs left. We used to have, from 100 square kilometers down to 50 square kilometers. Now we have maybe about 13 to 15 square kilometers of coral reefs left that still hold a lot of biodiversity, which I think Mei Lin will be able to share more about in a little bit. But yes, they are being threatened by coral bleaching. And one of the things that one of the research that we're actually, hopefully conducting soon is to also try and see if we can select for the naturally stress tolerant, or see if we can again work together with Celsi as well, Steve, that to see if we can find a way to make them more resilient to stress, especially temperature stress, right? Using probiotics, coral probiotics in a very lay person speak, right? And also this is very important because for restoration as well, because you don't want to be transplanting these thousands of corals only for them to die in the next bleaching event. So we also want to be very careful about what we do plant out, and this is very important for everyone of you thinking about restoration. It's not as simple as just planting the corals out. I think the choice of the coral species to maintain diversity and genetic diversity is very important, as well as the again to think about future proofing restoration efforts and choosing the right individuals that are resilient towards future stresses like temperature stress. And not only that, you have a lot of other concurrent stresses with climate change and rapidly increasing coastal urbanization and increasing coastal activities.
Yeah. I think to add on, so Yani's sharing a lot more from the corals perspective, and I looked at the other animals except corals. So actually, a lot of the marines, we basically have a highly biodiverse, set of marine life here in Singapore. So I think in terms of biodiversity, species richness is pretty high. But when you actually start to look at them individually, like say in terms of populations, their numbers, their distribution, then you start to realize that certain species are actually more challenged than other, or more threatened than others as well. So for example, the animals that I work on, which are the giant clams, and also that's also the main reason why that I was actually looking at them for my PhD until today. It's also because we have very, very low numbers of them around the different coral reefs here in Singapore. So one of the motivations for the project was to try and see if we can culture them and breed them successfully in the lab. And then, as with Yani say, with many other different considerations as well, how do we actually transplant them onto our local reefs, and ensuring that they actually would become sustainable and sort of lasting on the reef itself. But I also like to share that, in terms of biodiversity studies, we have a very strong team here looking at taxonomy and systematics. So it's a branch of research that looks at describing, finding, describing, and identifying species that we can find through, various techniques such as the morphology and using molecular approaches today as well. So yeah, and certain species also, like the clams that you see in my background right here, they also experience bleaching. What's very interesting between the giant clams and corals is that they have very different resilience to bleaching as well. And that's something that we synergize in our work. So we don't necessarily just use a single model species. We also use a broad number of different species where possible, to actually look at a same question, and maybe perhaps look at predicting how climate change, as an example, can affect different marine life, which I think brings me to one of the other questions that we have as well, which is how have other sciences from other fields, such as computation, simulations, have been used for marine science research? And I think this is probably a very open question to any of you who may have had some experience working with other scientists or engineering actually for your own research as well. Anyone would like to have
I'll say
go?
We do a lot of modeling, let's say, in the plastics field. So we'll have various scientists will go out and do what's called a census, look to see which plastics are in which bodies of water. And then we will work with modelers who will then look at various currents and things like that. I myself, working on the microbial side, do a lot of bioinformatic work. So this requires sort of high computing clusters, Python programming languages, most biologists as well. We would do a lot of statistics, we do a lot of computational statistics using the R package. So we can fit these elements of the different fields into our own, and we can sort of collaborate with specialists such as the modeling.
Yeah. Yeah, I think marine science is not just standalone. And I think, I guess because of the phrase itself, it sounds very, strongly focused on the biology. But actually, one thing that we've come to realize, especially after at the marine station, is that, we start to see like, engineers coming on board with their underwater robotics or robots, and also the aquaculture from the sort of like the innovation perspective, using technologies to help them maintain and sort of monitor how things are growing. So I know we're going to be, so we have one more question, which is very related to Steve's work, which is like, have you looked at possible harmful substances a biodegradable polymer might release, in the environment?
So in the strictest terms, a biodegradable polymer will break down into nothing more than carbon dioxide or methane for the most part. But there is interim phases. There's obviously, it goes from plastic to gas, and there are interim phases. And some of these molecules may have an effect, but also some of the chemicals that are absorbed onto the surface of the plastic may have an effect. So typically what we would do is run an ecotoxicological assay with it.
Right.
In the case of terrestrial, we could look at germination of seeds. In the case of marine, we can look at sort of toxicology with various model organisms such as Daphnia. So we do look for this ecotoxicology, but we don't necessarily identify it, because if it's truly biodegradable, then eventually it becomes CO2.
Oh, I see. Oh, that's very interesting. And I'm also learning new things from Steve about this as well. So we have one more question, which is related to science communication. So given that life underwater is something that not many people get to see or appreciate, so how do we have any advice on how to effectively communicate marine science? So maybe something very quickly from Steve, and then I'll do a wrap up for today.
So for mine, it's quite difficult because I work a lot on microbiology, so you couldn't even see it regardless of the environment. So for me, a lot of artistic drawing and colorful schematics can get the point across. So photography doesn't really pay me any dividends.
Yeah, I think I'm slightly lucky from what Steve is working. So I work on something iconic like the giant clams that you see just right behind my head right here. So even though they're so colorful and they're so big, but they also have a charisma problem. So I think very broadly and generally, when people think of oceans, when they think of conservation, they think of like, dolphins, whales, sharks, and sea turtles, and not surprising as well, because these animals carry a certain amount of charisma. But I think people don't quite appreciate that actually, and the oceans is full of many other different lives, and the many other different lives like microorganisms and also like the sea cucumbers, the clams. They actually run the show. They probably run most of the show that many people don't quite realize as well. So even from that pocket of information, I think that's something that we want to start off, which is like, how do we actually talk about their ecological functions and importance in supporting bigger animals as well. And there are many ways of doing it. We can always leverage on the fact that people love sea turtles, but we can also talk about plastics, because people have seen the impacts of plastics on sea turtles, and we can start with that thread. And there are many ways that we can also try to communicate by making use of a more iconic animal with respect to the topic that we are all studying today as well. So with that, I'd like to thank again the organizers of the GYSS for inviting all of us today to give our sharing. And we hope that we will see you one day at our marine station. So with that, I'd like to hand the time over to the organizers.